I happened to be invited to the European Parliament last year for the presentation of this new great movie by Giulietta Chiesa, a member of the Italian Parliament, a movie called Zero. How many have seen Zero? Oh, good, good. I would say if you're talking about full-length movies that cover all the many aspects of 9/11, it and Loose Change Final Cut are now the two movies, and I think they're equally good. They're both really, really excellent. Anyway, I was there, and then they had technological problems, and they couldn't get things to work. So Chiesa leaned over to me and said, "Kill some time, entertain the audience." So I just started ranting on. And so I told this story, among others. And as I was telling this story, I said, you know, that's an amazing story. This should have been 3-inch headlines, screaming headlines in the Washington Post. But of course it wasn't. But then a few months later, a group called the Freebies, taking off from the Bee Gees, put out a musical, a DVD, called 9/11's a Lie, based on staying alive, 9/11's a lie, 9/11's a lie. And so I was particularly happy in the middle of that to see the Washington Post with 3-inch screaming headlines. FBI says story told by former Solicitor General is untrue. Well, how many people would still believe the official theory if they knew the facts that I've just revealed to you and the dozens of other facts, if we were willing to stay here a few more hours, that I could tell you about, which the Boston Globe failed to mention? Not very many. This illustrates my point, that most people who continue to believe the Bush-Cheney conspiracy theory about 9/11 are simply unaware of dozens and dozens of facts that contradict this theory. For my final illustration of this point, I will discuss the collapse of Building 7 of the World Trade Center. The truth movement has long considered the collapse of this building to be the Achilles heel of the official theory, its most vulnerable spot. And for good reason. This building came down 5:21 that afternoon. It was not hit by a plane, and therefore no jet fuel was sprayed throughout it to start big fires. Therefore, this 47-story building had fires that lasted only on 6 floors. And yet, it came down in virtual freefall, straight down from a dead stop, just suddenly started moving at freefall acceleration. And it came straight down, and then it ended up in a relatively small, tidy pile. In other words, it looked every bit like the form of controlled demolition known as implosion, where you use explosives to collapse the building from the bottom, then have the walls fold in on themselves, and that's how you get the rather tidy pile. Defenders of the official story clearly did not want Americans to think about Building 7. After 9/11 itself, as far as I know, this collapse was never shown on mainstream television, while we saw the Twin Towers ad nauseum, time after time after time, but no showing of Building 7. Likewise, the 9/11 Commission could not afford one sentence in its 571-page report to even mention that this 47-story building had collapsed. And this was a historic event, being the first time in the known universe in which a steel frame building had collapsed because of fire alone. Surely that would have been worth a sentence. Also, NIST, which had the task of reporting on it, delayed the report year after year after year. Originally, the reports were supposed to come out in 2004, and they said, we're not ready. We'll do it in 2005. 2005, they put out the report on the World Trade Center, the towers, but said, oh, Building 7 is going to take a little longer. It'll come out next year. Next year came. They said, no, it'll come out in 2007. In 2007, they said, no, it'll come out in the beginning of 2008. Beginning of 2008, they said, it'll come out in August. Well, by golly, it did. The first draft came out in August. And then the final draft came out in November. Coincidentally, I'm sure, just before Bush and Cheney were ready to leave office. In any case, my next book, well, not quite my next book. My next book that's going to come out pretty quickly is going to be called Osama Bin Laden, Dead or Alive, and I argue that he's long been dead. And amazingly, it looks like we can pinpoint the date of death, either December 13th or 14th, 2001. One little clue is the funeral announcement of Bin Laden's funeral on December 15th, 2001. And so I'm suggesting that, and also, I mean, the really crucial thing is that as the FBI, as the CIA will report, and former CIA operative Robert Baer, who wrote the book on which Syriana was somewhat based, has said he's checked with his fellow CIA officials who have the task of tracking Bin Laden, and not one of them can say that he's still alive, and that they all say we have not intercepted another message from him since December 13th, whereas prior to that, they were intercepting messages to and from Bin Laden rather regularly, and they just stopped on December 13th. So those two things present pretty good evidence. And then, of course, there's the question, well, what about all the audio tapes and videotapes in which Bin Laden has appeared? Well, have you looked at some of those? None of them can be proved to be authentic, and some of them can clearly be seen to be inauthentic. So somebody is faking these things. My favorite is Blackbeard the Terrorist, where Bin Laden, whose beard has been getting grayer and grayer and grayer, suddenly has a purely black beard. These guys are not geniuses. If our news organizations or our Congress were doing 1/10 of their job, this would have been exposed long, long, long ago. In fact, I have one of my books, I think it's actually my favorite book of this. It's called 9/11 Contradictions, an open letter to Congress and the press, and I lay out 25 internal contradictions within the official story. There's no theory in this book. You can't dismiss it as conspiracy theory. It's just facts that this person who supports the official theory contradicts this person who supports the official theory on some very crucial thing, like what time did Dick Cheney go down to the underground bunker where he became in charge that morning? Did he go down at about 9:10 or 9:15, as almost everybody reports, or did he go down at almost 10 o'clock, 45 minutes later after the Pentagon attack, as the 9/11 Commission report says? And that's just one of 25. And if the press had been doing its job, just revealing those contradictions, you wouldn't have to talk about contradictions of laws and physics in the Pentagon and the World Trade Center, just internal contradictions. But they won't report them. An open letter to Congress and the press, and not one mainstream newspaper, magazine, TV station, radio station has even mentioned the existence of a book that is reporting these contradictions in the official story.